Sides square, dude, go get them sides. Heads do a half sachet.
It's been cleverly said that 5 minutes before the party is no time to learn to dance. This wisdom can apply to many things where early preparation is essential. This holds especially true for an effective disaster response. The efforts of various organizations responding to a disaster should be a well-orchestrated mobilization, much like smooth, coordinated dance steps. When disaster strikes, resources are quickly overwhelmed. The need for help often exceeds a community's ability to provide assistance to the people affected.
In the time it took me to walk across this street right here, the fire came down off that mountain and had this field behind me in a blaze.
The fire continued to burn down both sides of the Rattlesnake through the Hanford site and down towards Benton City.
By that time I was over across the street at my haystack. I was trying to water down the haystack and figure out what I was going to the horses, still kind of not in touch with what was really happening until it hit right here.
All of a sudden there was a real emergency. In fact, we had one of the fire chiefs setting a backfire, and that fire outraced him, and he was doing 20 miles an hour down the road. And so with that kind of an emergency, and then with the speed that it happened, there was a lot of confusion.
I was screaming for my wife and daughter to leave, and whether they had me or not, and they couldn't hear me, and I couldn't hear them, and I couldn't see them, and the smoke was so thick, and ambers and stuff flying through the air that we just lost touch with everybody. When we evacuated here, we were fearing for our lives. When we left here, we weren't sure we were going to get out.
While we tend to focus on the dramatic physical effects of destruction, we sometimes forget that disasters first and foremost affect people. Basic needs like water, food, shelter, and security may suddenly become difficult to meet. The longer these needs go unmet, the greater the disruption is to the entire community.
A lot of good people here lost everything. I got a few animals that I'm doctoring still, but that isn't like losing your home and losing everything you own and having to start over from nothing.
Food became a real major problem. We ran out of food and drinks during the fire. During that time period, it was over 100 degrees. People were dying of thirst. And we ran out of water. We needed the water hours earlier. We needed the food earlier.
In the news, we see a number of volunteer organizations on the scene in nearly every disaster. Often, these groups are acting independently without knowing what the others are doing.
There's really no one on site in the community to coordinate all of the volunteers and or the things that they're providing, as in time, the equipment they're providing, the wheelbarrows and the shovels and the rakes and the foodstuffs and the gloves and the face masks. There's no one there to coordinate. Where do they really need to go?
People are great. They want to help. They want to donate. But unless they know who to contact, how to do it, who to work with, it doesn't come together. This is our second disaster in 4 years. We should have learned the first time, and we didn't. And hopefully this time we've learned.
At the national and state level, many faith-based and other disaster response organizations have come together as volunteer organizations active in disaster, or VOAD. In our state, the Washington State Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, called WAVOAD, coordinates with Washington State Emergency Management. These organizations communicate, collaborate, coordinate, and cooperate with each other, so they are better able to meet the needs of disaster victims in a timely and coordinated manner. Even with organizations like these hard at work helping people affected by a disaster, there is still a great local need for additional resources when disaster strikes.
After our federal agencies and bureaucracies, the Red Crosses and the FEMAs have done their job and gone home, now we are here, and we are still here, and we still need to recover. And so that recovery process, the coordination of the needs of emotions, the needs of homes, the needs of clothes, all of those kinds of needs, and the coordination of getting that back to people and getting people back to normalcy is very vitally important.
All the local organizations came out and they did lots of really great things, Legion cooked meals. They took in supplies for people. Lions helped raise money, did things through them. Chamber of Commerce did things. All the churches went out and helped. The problem was nobody knew what anybody else was doing. And the victims didn't know what anybody was doing. We had no way to get the word to them. We had no way to tell them, hey, we've got cleaning supplies here. We've got shovels. We've got wheelbarrows. We've got all kinds of food for you and your kids and all kinds of clothing.
Community organizations active in disaster may be the answer. A COAD encourages government, businesses, volunteer groups, faith-based, and community organizations of all kinds to work together in order to provide timely and coordinated disaster assistance to the entire community. One of the best ways to minimize a disaster's impact on people is to understand what role each organization will play before the disaster strikes. When disaster strikes your community, will your response efforts be a coordinated dance?
While the commissioners are sitting here inside the Emergency Operating Center assisting in the evacuations from this vantage point, with the formation of COAD type activities, people that are understanding and knowing and trained inside their own communities, that allows us to know who to call, who to activate, and who to coordinate with.
Working alone, emergency management staff cannot begin to meet all of the challenges presented during a disaster.
If you look at smaller counties, their EM staff may be one person, whether it be the sheriff or the fire chief, he's wearing two hats. You'll have volunteer organization, Red Cross, come in and support that initial response and recovery for that community. But theirs is a limited approach. In other words, once they get to a certain point, then they're done. The community themselves are going to have to pick up the pieces of what's left to do.
The good news is that there are many additional resources in every community that can help respond to these needs. And this is a key reason for forming a COAD. Individual efforts would be coordinated before a disaster strikes, resulting in a well-planned response to local needs. Let's take a look at some of the reasons why your community should consider forming a COAD.
The value to any organization, there are really two benefits. One is the rest of the community understand what they bring to the table, so they know to turn to them. And two, that group understands the other resources that other groups bring to the table, and they know how to connect with them.
If those folks have already been meeting, talking, are familiar with each other, well then basically, instead of us being in a leadership role, we can follow their leadership. And with them we can be in a supportive role.
The partnership between local emergency management agencies and the COAD is a vital link in this team effort.
What we need to do is we, the emergency managers, need to sit down with the Salvation Army and these other support organizations and the Red Cross to coordinate our efforts. And that again is a very efficient use of everybody's time, so that we're not duplicating efforts, so that we're not having to develop individual relationships with individual organizations. We can work with a consolidated group.
Well, the local governments, I think, generally are aware that they don't have all the resources that people need. And if they're unaware of the resources that the various voluntary groups in the community can bring to the table, they will be scrambling in the middle of a disaster event to discover where they are and who they are and how to bring them to the table.
As a business, we can bring a lot to these organizations when we're working with them. Businesses can offer talent and expertise and facilities to use. Some businesses can offer equipment and supplies and materials that might be in real need in a community during an emergency situation. It's really important for us to do this, and we'll benefit from it because it'll help our employees who live in the community, it'll help our customers who also live there, and together, if we pool our talents and our resources among everyone working together in the COAD, we can recover much faster, much better.
When anything bad happens at the community level, almost inevitably business will get involved because business is affected by a disaster, and business is also a resource for dealing with a disaster.
Participating does not mean losing your identity or autonomy. Rather, it increases your organization's visibility and value to the community.
A principle in emergency management and any type of emergency response is that all organizations maintain their identity, be they a fire department, police department, or be they the Salvation Army, Red Cross, or any other type of voluntary organization. We are there, again, just to facilitate the coordination of those groups. It's really fairly straightforward. In my workings with our local COAD organization, I'm learning more from those people, and they're influencing what I do almost more than I'm influencing what they do.
We have learned to cooperate and pool our efforts and not duplicate in efforts, but share the load. And that's what it's all about.
The tendency, because we're all so busy, is to put a request like this on hold or to do it later. But I want to encourage you to please try to get involved with your community's COAD now. It's important because emergencies and disasters are going to happen whether or not we're prepared. And so let's get together and figure it out now and really be a benefit to our community.
In a COAD, you'll be communicating, collaborating, and coordinating with other groups to determine how best to meet the disaster needs of the community you live in, work in, and love. COADs ensure that services are delivered according to priorities, doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people in the shortest period of time. Take the lead. Call a meeting of every group you know that has an interest in helping your community. But you have to act now. As the saying goes, 5 minutes before the party is no time to learn to dance. Your community can have a well-choreographed response when disaster strikes if you plan and work together ahead of time. You have nothing to lose and the grateful appreciation of your community to gain.